Welcome, everyone, to our lightning lesson. And for any of you who are joining, who may be subscribers to my newsletter, it's a very special edition of Street Smart Product Manager Live. I'm Shardul. With me is Mike Smart. And today we're going to talk about why executives ignore your roadmap. So, over the last year, Mike and I have talked to a ton of product leaders, senior product executives, and other business executives to understand what exactly is expected of product management, broadly speaking, and how some of the very best product leaders are able to earn executive trust, influence, and buy-in, and some of the challenges and opportunities that we've uncovered along the way. So we're going to share a lot of that with you today. I'd love to start with a quick poll question as each of you continue introducing yourselves in the chat. If you wouldn't mind just sharing what role you're in and what what size company. You can size in terms of revenue if you know it or employees. Just trying to get a sense of who's joining us. So go ahead, take a moment, enter that in the chat. Okay, so we
Main
got
product. Yeah, we've got a
SMB, senior product manager. Ooh,
director, about
geospatial
800
products,
employees.
cool.
Yeah, yeah.
Less than 30 million, okay. Director of Product Ops, okay, 800 employees. Okay. Others, global financial institution, product manager, senior product manager, products and ops advisor. Okay.
We've got a good mix here from people that are starting
Yeah.
early stage seed companies to I saw someone with less than 10,000 employees. So, yeah, more than
Yeah.
10,000, I should say. Yeah, so it's a good mix.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a pretty broad mix. Yeah. Principal PM, 10,000 employees. So okay, so that's really interesting. It's a pretty broad mix, which means everyone is kind of feeling this squeeze. So we got a lot to share with you guys today. We're gonna go pretty fast, hot and heavy. We'll obviously leave time at the end for questions, but that said, as we go through, if you have questions, feel free to dump them in the chat, and we'll try and get to as many as we can between Mike and myself. So in talking to a lot of these, yes, this recording will be shared. It's being recorded on Maven, where you probably registered from. A lot of product leaders that we've been talking to, they feel this squeeze, right? So, they're getting these top-down mandates. I'm sure this is familiar to a lot of you. There's revenue targets, there's maybe new market launches, there's other strategic initiatives, other requests that are kind of coming down to the product leader, right, to manage. But then there's also this bottom-up reality, right? This is the muck and the sludge that we deal with every single day. I don't think I'm saying anything controversial or new here, right? But it's all this stuff that you see at the bottom, and you have to manage both of it, right? And it's not easy. And what we're finding is that if you're trying to craft a product roadmap and a product strategy, a lot of the traditional frameworks, they'll teach you like force rank scoring and things like that. It doesn't really work. And others will say, well, you should be strategic. Download some template, start top down. But the reality at the same time is that you can't simply ignore all the work at the bottom, right? There's some valuable stuff that's down there, down meaning at the bottom of the slide, right? In terms of competitive research, things that you may have in the backlog, other sort of things, right? Now, so there's often real value there. So product management involves managing the friction at this intersection of the bottom-up needs and the top-down imperatives. The folks at the top are just not privy and exposed to the stuff at the bottom. We are, right? But at the same time, right, we are talking to people at the top level who don't think in those terms. They think in completely different terms, which we'll get to in a second. They have just a totally different scorecard. So we have to translate the tactical output into funding these scoreboard outcomes, right? So the way to do that is we need to translate that into fundable scoreboard outcomes. And so executive alignment isn't really about getting them to understand your backlog, right? So we see a lot of product teams, what they'll do is they'll start presenting the features, essentially some version of the backlog. Maybe if not presenting Jira boards, they're certainly there's some slide or some some app or something that they're doing which is essentially presenting some kind of a feature-based output. And what essentially we're ending up doing is trying to get them to understand our backlog, right? But that's not how you get executive alignment. It's about proving that our backlog actually understands the business. So a disciplined product strategy isn't about prioritizing the feature list, it's deciding which levers, which business levers to pull and which ones to leave alone.
I would just go back a slide. I would just offer to the team what my experience is from living in the mess and working with clients in a mess. The backlog usually is a fairly good representation of what's really going on in the business and what's really should be going with the product. Shardul's point, I think, is excellent. You need to translate it into something that lets it land in the C-suite so that you can get it funded and you can get things moving forward. So that it's not that there's something wrong with the way you're doing your backlog or your feature gathering or your requirements gathering. It's how do you set it up so that you can successfully succeed in getting the resources you want to do the things that are most important.
Exactly. So really, what we've discovered is that there's a need for a different framing mechanism because this is the scoreboard that the executives are mapping to, right? At the end of the day, executives don't fund features and they don't really fund a roadmap. They fund improvements to the scoreboard. And this is the scoreboard when you really boils down to it, what you see on the screen there. Now, the specific financial metrics may vary based on the type of business for sure, but essentially at the end of the day, it's all about growth, retention, and profitability. And every product initiative needs to map to one of these in some way, directly or indirectly. If we're not able to do that, we can't expect any kind of commitment. And that's why a lot of times these priorities end up getting relitigated. And, frankly, like executives think nothing about just rearranging the deck chairs, right? Because they're mapping to like whatever is going to be best to be able to help us get to one of these or all of these goals, right? So let's go through like a real life example. So, you're VP of product, you're head of product. It's Monday morning, you've just taken your first sip of coffee. You open your email and find this little gem, right? So it's from the CFO. The subject simply says product budget need to talk. And it just says we need to find 15% in product spend before the board call. I need to understand where we're cutting, what stays, and why. Can we connect by the end of this week?
I, I'm curious to know from the audience if they've ever experienced this, have firsthand show of hands, pop something in the not show of hands, but pop something in the chat if this lands with you as being real, something that you've experienced before,
I see Ryan raising his hand. Usually a dollar figure
right?
variation of this for sure. Right, exactly. Yeah, there's some
Yeah,
variation of this.
right.
Absolutely. Yeah, so this is not an uncommon common problem. Yeah, not within a week, but dollars or percentage. Yeah, yeah. By the way, I have gotten an email like this, and fun fact, right at the end of Q1. So Q1 just closed, the numbers were soft, and the CFO wanted to see me, and oh, great news. The board meeting is next week. So, you know, they need something like ASAP.
72 hours.
Yeah,
Right. Get a board deck
exactly.
ready. Yeah.
Ryan writes, yes, and sometimes it's more vague.
It
Yeah,
can be. That's
exactly.
right. A
Right.
little passive
Exactly.
aggressive play. If you had to get something off the list, what would it look like? And who would you let go of? Yeah. What would you
Yeah.
drop? Yeah.
Yeah. So, if you had to, think about your own roadmap. If you had to cut 15% of your product spend within 3 weeks, do you know where you'd cut? Can you defend what stays? Can you explain the trade-offs in business terms? And would your executive team trust your logic? Right? Go ahead and again, this is Vegas rules. We won't share this with anyone. But go ahead and say like, is this a question you feel prepared to answer? And Van, I know you put a question in there. We'll
I've
get
got
to it in just a
questions.
second. Yeah, we'll get to it in just a second. But go ahead and take a moment and see, answer this question. If you had to cut 15% of your product spend in 3 weeks, would you know how to do it? Do you feel prepared to do it?
Somebody put up a heart, must have felt good about it, or maybe they felt like this really landed. I don't know.
Yeah, one of the two. So, yeah. So most product leaders that we work with, oh, sorry, Beth has
Let's
responded. When
get
I've
back.
had deep insights into the customer needs, it's easier. Yeah, for sure. This is an area where we would need to better plan for contingency and better map out budgets. Interesting, right? Mhm. Yeah. Although I will say sometimes it's beyond a budget issue.
I was going to say the budget idea is a tactical one, and maybe this leans into Van's question a little bit, which I think is important. It's because it's a question about not having perfect information. And I'm going to give you my version of a news flash. As a product leader or even a business leader, you never have perfect information. No such thing. So, in your ask is, what's your recommendation of how to balance this? I'd say entertain this scenario proactively on your own more often than not. The biggest challenge I think that product leaders have is they build the great upside and never think about what happens if the unfortunate scenario or the worst case scenario, and getting ready for that through conversations, through exercises with your team. Running this exercise we're sharing with you right now with your team can get you better prepared so you're not on your heels when that email comes in.
Yeah. So, the interesting thing is that most of the product leaders we work with, who are all, by the way, they're experienced, they're smart, they're well-intentioned, they end up walking into this sort of a conversation without a really, truly defensible answer. And it's not because they don't know their product or even their customer, or that they're bad at product management, right? But it's because their roadmap isn't really built to survive this question. The fact of the matter is that most of us were not really trained to handle this question, nor questions like it, right? We've been trained to do something quite different. I know I was trained to do something quite different. There is nothing in any product management playbook that I've seen that teaches you how to effectively handle a question like this or similar questions like it. So, what what we typically do is we revert to what we know, what we were trained to do, right? When the pressure hits, product teams reach for what they know. We end up debating the merits of features. We certainly try and advocate for the customer cause in the way we think that makes sense. We often present capacity and date trade-offs. We might advocate for the customer. Customer X is expecting feature Y, that sort of thing. The problem is that all of this is really invisible to the people who are asking these hard questions because the CFO or any of the CXO, they're not really looking at our roadmap. And to be honest, they don't really care. The CFO, to go back to our email example, they're not looking at a roadmap, they're looking at a financial statement. And those two documents just don't speak the same language at the end of the day. And so the result is something that what Mike and I call the reset cascade, right? The priorities end up getting relitigated. We start debating based upon opinions and project allocations, budget allocations, instead of commitments to business outcomes. And so one conversation bleeds to another, the roadmap becomes the whipping post, and then you, the product leader, me, all of us, we end up spending more time rebuilding the consensus that we thought already existed than actually moving the work forward.
It's also a no-win situation for everybody involved, right? Because it becomes political, it becomes hippo driven, it becomes emotional. And if we as product leaders haven't really taken the proactive, I'll use Vance from the proactive approach, there's no way we can come out of this looking like we're leading. There's no way we can come out of this intact. And there's some other things, and I'm not going to give the spoiler alert yet, some other things that happen downstream that make this even worse. So somebody said, John said bingo, and you're right. So we've described the failure mode. So where does this leave us? Can you go to the next slide, Shardul? If
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And by the way, we're not blaming. We've lived this. I have scars on my back. Shardul in private moments has shared his tales with me and showed me his scars. Anybody who's done this job for more than a business cycle has lived this and understood it. And it's not about talent. It's about something missing from the operating principles that we drive. And so what we've sat with and what we've learned is how to do product craft, and we're proud of it. We're makers, we're builders. I was looking at this morning, somebody just put out a maker's manifesto, and it's grounding and putting a flag in the ground about the fact that we're builders. And I read it, and it was very impressive, and I was inspired by it. And then I have to say, and then you have to lay down the business economic cycle next to it, and somehow these things have to mesh. So I want to, next slide, if you will. I want to just talk about where we are in relationship to where we've been. Most of us who've been in this business for more than 5 years, some of us more than 20, come from in this business of learning what I call a framework. Many of them, some cases, too many of them. One of my favorites, SAFE, stands as one of the principles by which some people even accused of turning product management on its head, not for a good thing. And others, like pragmatic marketing or product side, have built these ideas of doing the task and the craft and organizing around them. And we say that that's a great facility because it gave us the ability to get a common language. It gave us a way to work together in teams. It gave us the ability to scale. It made our work more professional so that people, at least close enough to us, could understand what are they trying to build? Why are they trying to build it? In the old cliche term now, what problem are they solving? All of that was good news. All of that was good stuff. And it was really important to establish those principles and that practice. And most of us now who've been in this business for a while understand it, respect it, and can live with it and do that work at some level. The reality is, and Shardul hinted at this, CFO doesn't care about the framework. She is not talking about a framework when she asks for a 15% cut. I like to say she doesn't care about how we make the sausage, to use an old school term about this work. She cares about the outcome. She cares about the impact on the balance sheet and the income statement and cash flow. And so we're ill-equipped because of the lack of an operating system of how to have that conversation and how to basically position and be proactive in how we engage with the CFO and the rest of the leadership team, the ELT, as we bring our product craft into the C-suite. So next slide, if you will. So this is my declaration, if you will. I think we're moving to something. We're moving to something different. And whether or not it's what exactly the end game looks like, I don't think anybody can tell us. But we do know this, that the conversation around economic impact, the conversation around business dynamics is dominating the discussion and the activity around product management more than it ever has before. And these three principal things within inside that box called business fluency method: growth, efficiency, and retention, fundable units, investable bets, are not just things that we've invented. This is pervasive throughout the entire community about talking about what this means and how we're going to move forward. And so in answering the question about how do you deal with the 15% question, the only way to do that is to shift the conversation and shift the language and come up with something that's not framework dependent, but more economic dependent, to describe in terms, what do we do when we are asked to make the 15% cut? And how do we demonstrate that we've got a handle on it? And most importantly, how do we effectively communicate to the rest of the organization there is an impact, and it cannot sit with just product management. It has to be an impact that's understood across the organization. So we'll talk about things like trade-off structures and trade-off conversations, and putting things on a table to allow us to lock things in place. We built our version of a maturity model, and we highlighted 4 areas that we thought distinguished one organization from another in terms of where they were on this journey of becoming more business fluent in the context of doing product work. And we see people at the top of this level 4, we'll call them portfolio operators. They're making clear decisions. They're most importantly balancing the conversation between product craft discussion, how things get built, what it means to build them, but dominate and bringing a balance in that conversation to making assumptions about bets that are being made, having trade-off discussions, and also not subtly and not put there last, and the stopping conditions that basically say when we launch something, how do we take it? How do we stop it if we need to? Um, Expressing it in the language of the CFO, expressing it in business terminology. The next one down are we see companies and leaders that are doing a very good work about assigning and aligning financial contributions that are visible. They use investment logic. The difference is that they probably aren't explicit enough about it, and sometimes these things buckle under pressure. And then we see a lot of companies doing what I call product metrics. And these are anything from operational metrics about usage or adoption, some of them tie to economic value, some of them don't. But the problem is because there's not a full translation going on, we have members of our ELT that will understand the principles of this and why it's important, others that don't. So there's still a struggle happening. And then lastly, the first level group are people that are still shipping. They're primarily oriented around building, dropping, releasing, and pushing things out in that way. And we're not we're not judging anybody for where they are in the cycle. We're just saying where you are. What our work tells us is that most people are operating at level one and level two. There are a few operating at the other two levels. And the distance is it's something you might check for a symptom. If there's a lot of friction when you start doing product planning, roadmap discussion, that's a symptom that you probably are operating at the lower levels of maturity than the higher levels.
Just to add one thing real quick, it's interesting, and we've had the chance in the last 6 or 9 months to talk to a lot of CPOs, chief product officers, and it was amazing how almost universally to a person, they said they spend so much of their time paying what Mike and I call the translation tax. They are translating the product work on behalf of their product teams to their colleagues at the ELT level and to the board, right? So if you look at their presentations, it's all business, financial metrics, economic outcomes, things like that. But you go one level lower and you don't see that quite as much. So there's just this top heavy translation tax that's being paid as a result.
The consequence of that is huge. And if there are CPOs in this room, they understand what it is. And as Shardul said, we've talked a lot. The burden of pressure they feel of being, and someone describes, I'm the only person on the team that's lifting this weight. That's hard. So the call out we're making is the next tier down, the director, the VP level should engage in this and help make this transition more fluid and more easily because the organization as a whole benefits. Not just that. If you have aspirations, career aspirations in this role, this is the level which you're going to have to play going forward. The days of just building and shipping are over. So getting on this path, this journey to learn how to carry on this conversation is essential to career longevity.
There's a I'll make one last point, and then Mike, I know you want to get to the next slide. I'm sure all of you have heard of this little thing called AI, right? And so the thing about AI is so much of it is focused on productivity and speed, right? And we're all experiencing this. The ability to pump software out and ship something is becoming so commoditized as a result of AI, which means that now there is added pressure on things like good judgment, business judgment, not just build judgment, but business judgment, commercial thinking, go to market. Those things become far more important. The ability to understand how distribution works. And what we're finding in our conversations, not just with CPOs, but with other executives, so outside of product, right, who work with product teams, not the CTO, but CRO, the CEO, the COO, the CFO, is they actually want product teams to step up more and more and be able to talk, but they have concerns because they don't hear that language, or they don't see that coming out from the product teams. And I think this is the real thing. I mean, to Mike's point about career management, I would, if you want to think about how to manage your career going forward, like I think that is the bigger differentiator Because if everybody can build software, then being able to like be more efficient at writing requirements or prototyping and all of that using AI, that's going to be a commodity. Everyone's going to be able to do it, right? So what's really going to distinguish you or product management in general, right? And that's this is the key thing because product management is a position where we get to look at all of it, right? All the other departments are, I don't want to call them siloed, right? But they're looking at their own corner of the universe, marketing, sales, support. We get to look broadly across the entire business. So we are very well positioned to be able to advocate for and make the points about where should the business strategy go.
It it only works if, and you can go to the next slide. I can make this. It only works and it's only credible if you're operating at the right altitude inside the organization. So you can't walk into the C-suite and talk about what it takes to build it, how many lines of code you're running, what the QA, those things are critically important and they're not going away. It's just the expectation and the squeeze. That's the point that Shardul made on the second slide. The squeeze is not about the backlog as much as it was 5 years ago. It's about how do we push this into the marketplace and get traction results. So we lay down an operating system. We told you that this was not a talent issue, it's an absence of an operating system. And it includes four things: your ability as a product leader to understand your company's revenue model, your company's revenue architecture, your company's business model. How does your company make money? What are the buckets that get collected, cash get come in from clients, customers in the marketplace, and how do they get distributed? And I'll give you another layer down. And which one of those buckets carries more profit? Which one of them carries more cost than the other? If you want to play this game, those are critical elements. The other one is back to the backlog. We are adamant about not promoting features out of the backlog. We have a terminology we've developed, and it's not complicated. We call these things that come out of the backlog fundable units. It's not the JIRA ticket, but it's an accumulation of things that come out of our backlog that belong in a roadmap that show that there's potential for the business to be impacted positively by it. Those things don't get funded. So there's another step that says, which one of these would you bet on? If I have 25 things coming out of the backlog that look like they're worthy of getting funding, I don't have enough budget. So how do I make a determination which five or seven, whichever I have the capacity for and the funding for, to build? That requires some sophisticated work around investment logic, making assumptions, explicit sizing, laying down the upside potential, what the downside risk is, and also stopping conditions. Because what happens if I bet wrong? And we want to avoid the sunk cost scenario. And then the last one, and this is most important, is what we call decision discipline. This is the place where we're advocating that product leaders need to establish authority and control. We're not going to tell you it's easy. We're going to tell you it's essential to step in and play this game. If you, as a product leader, are being asked to build faster, deploy faster, align partners, and align the ecosystem to make the company successful, when things line up that don't look right, there has to be some specific and objective way to say, this is off the rails. We need to make an adjustment or we need to stop what we're doing. Or to avoid the reset scenario that Shardul started with, we have an emotional reaction to a soft first quarter, and somebody with a financial orientation that doesn't understand the product dynamic at all wants to come in and start slashing everything that looks big. We have a lock scenario. It says, what conditions did we lay down in advance to determine if we would lock this, adjust it, or kill it? If those conditions haven't measured up, it should stand on its own. We would tell you if you lay down this operating system, you're way ahead of the game. You're way ahead of everybody else out there that's doing this because this is where the business is going. So, you probably have some other comments you want to make.
Actually, yeah. So before we go on to I talk about the next slide, there was a question from Alex on the levels that we
Mm.
had here. And Van, I've not forgotten your question, I promise. We will get it's a broader question, so we'll get to it, I promise. Sorry, Alex's question is where does this level three, level four translation live? Should it live in the tool which houses the roadmap or elsewhere?
That's a great question. Um, I think it has to live in multiple places. in order for this, and I know where Alex is coming from, having done some work with him in the past over the years, it needs to live, if it's fully implemented and installed, it needs to live inside the platform and the tools and or platform that the product organization is using, simply because it makes it easier for people to adopt. It makes it easier for the principles to be adapted to the way the business runs. And we're not telling you this is one size fits all. This is not a framework mentality. Take your box of the day and drop it in and work with it. This has to change with your business. So it needs to live there. It also needs to live, believe it or not, awareness wise at the ELT level, so that when product leaders show up with this vocabulary and this terminology and this understanding, they're not getting rebuffed. So there has to be some alignment, I'll use that term, or some some consensus around we're going to run the business this way, and it has to live at the executive level. And those are probably the two most important structural places. And then between the product leader, CPO, EVP, whatever that person's title is, and her direct reports, it has to be operationalized. So that's like knowing it. In fact, Shardul and I were having a conversation the other day, and I'm a basketball nut. I'm also a FIFA nut, but you see these common moves, and I hate to do a sports analogy, but I use the term the no look pass. And so it's being able to basically execute without having to think about it, and know that when you make this execution moves, your teammate, your direct report, or your boss knows exactly what's going on, and there's no translation happening anymore. So it needs to live in these three places simultaneously. That's a long-winded answer to your question, Alex.
I'll just say that I remember my team, the Eagles, beat the no look pass quarterback guy. But anyways, that's neither here nor there. Um, Rebecca, just to super unfairly answer your question, because I'm going to give you a quick answer, and then maybe at the end we can come back to it. Okay? You're asking about replatforming. How do you look at a replatforming effort? What I will say very quickly is that even a replatforming effort has a business case, has a business outcome. It may or may not be revenue attached. In fact, I have a very long article in my newsletter that I've written about specifically about replatforming. If you won't mind, remind me at the end. I'll be happy to send it to you. So it it may not drive direct revenue, but there is definitely, if they're investing that much, there is some business implication for it. So um, let's move on. And I love the questions. Keep them coming. We'll get to as many as we can. You know what Mike is talking about, and this sort of Alex gets a little bit to your question, but at a bit higher level, is the first thing is this is an identity shift for a lot of people. It does require a shift. It requires an identity shift. Um, a lot of the folks Mike and I speak with, look, we like to think of ourselves as creators, builders, innovators. We've gotten comments from people who'll say, you know, I got into product management because I love to solve customer problems and build solutions for them. And by the way, that's how I got into it as well. But in reality, we've become trained to become roadmap managers. So just think about it. Because largely what happens is that we end up spending our days and talking a lot in terms of features and plans. But the shift is moving into a portfolio ownership mindset, right? Especially once you kind of get to a point where you're dealing with um, a more complex or a larger product set, right? I'm not talking about sub 5 million startup, that sort of thing, right? Um, so a roadmap manager will end up defending what's on the list and debating those. A portfolio owner will explain why this bet is better over another bet. So back to some of the terminology in the previous slide that Mike shared. The leaders that we've worked with who hold their ground in these conversations, they're not the ones with the most detailed roadmap or the fanciest tool or the prettiest slide or anything like that or the most elegantly designed Jira board. Okay. They're the ones who can articulate in advance what they would stop and why. They would be able to argue with conviction on those investable bets, right? Those are the ones who earn trust with the CXO or the board. So I'll share a quick story here, and I shared this once. at a previous webinar that Mike and I did, and people seemed to like it. Mike loved it so much, so he told me to share it again. So after I got my, I was an engineer, like I'm sure many of you may have been when you started out, and I decided to, as my friends constantly remind me, move to the dark side. So I got my MBA, thinking, okay, well that's how I'll learn how to do business, right? And then I fell into this job called product manager without, this is like 25 years ago, okay, guys, 25, 26, 27 years ago. I fell into this job called product manager without really knowing what it was, and I started doing the work, and it was a lot of build and features, and I read all the books, took all the trainings, I absorbed all of that, but things just kind of weren't really working. And to make a long story short, then the shift that I made, I was lucky where I got some good mentors. I worked in a company that served retailers. Now, I don't know if you've ever worked in the retail world, but and by the way, again, this is back 25 years ago when e-commerce was barely a thing. Retailers, they had hired a bunch of former merchandisers and buyers, and they think in very simple, straightforward P&L ways, right? Just like, what can I sell? How much can I make? That was pretty much it. They didn't get all this fancy product terminology and product craft and things like that. And so when I started couching things in those terms, that's when it started resonating much more strongly with not only them, but with the ELT as well. And it's funny because then that's what they started giving me feedback saying, yeah, 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 this is what we want from product management. And that was the light bulb. It was basically the stuff on the right on this slide, right? Or it's the stuff on the previous slide. That's what they were really looking for. But the funny thing is that when I got the job, or if you look at even job descriptions today, they won't tell you that because we keep going into these situations where we expect the organization to clearly define the role of product management when, it's they're not going to. They're just not going to,
Shardul,
right?
they don't know how to. They don't
They don't know how
understand what
to.
they're being into, right?
I've worked with several founders. I've been a founder, okay, and I've worked with several founders. Why do they hire a VP of sales or a CRO? It's not because they know sales. I mean, there's an element of course, you have, if you're an entrepreneur, there's a bit of salesmanship, absolutely, that's required. But they hire that person, they hire a CMO or head of marketing because you're the expert. You tell me how should it run. And it's no different with product management, but you've got to translate it into those terms of financial outcomes, right? So this is the big shift. That portfolio ownership is really a different identity, and the leverage is for product leaders to be able to upskill their teams. Product teams, they can facilitate this and they can enable this shift. And of course, then they have to be trusted and empowered to enable this sort of shift. So I want to ask you guys something. How much of the revenue cycle, if you look at your product set, what you do today, how much of the revenue cycle are you actually responsible for? Take a moment and put it into the chat. Oh, in the end, all of it. Okay, well, there you go.
Yes, that's the right answer.
That's the
That
right
is the right
answer.
answer.
I think a role to responsibility example would help. Okay, not really sure I am. Yeah, okay, fair enough.
Here's a spin on that. There's an expectation inside your organization. So if you ask the CEO how much of the revenue cycle you're responsible, what do you think their response is?
It feels unspoken. Yeah.
It is absolutely right. That's exactly right.
Um, so now most product leaders we talk to, you guys are really smart. Uh, Most product leaders we talk to will answer with some version of the build side. In fact, we've been on forums where we literally hear this isn't just product managers, product leaders say, well, we can't really control revenue. We don't really have any influence over it. So some of you, you've probably seen some version of this funnel before. If it's unfamiliar, just Google sales funnel or ask your favorite AI chatbot. This is a pretty typical sales funnel. You got your awareness at the top, sales at the bottom. It maps how you win a customer, right? How you get to revenue. There's two problems with this. One is that one of the things as a product management community, I think we've ended up doing largely because of this focus on building and speed to build is we've largely delegated this to sales. We've assumed it's a sales thing. In fact, I've had product people tell me that's sales. That's not me. And the second is that while it shows you how to win a customer, it doesn't show you how to keep one. So the real revenue model looks something more like this on the right. After the customer and the business commit to doing business, there's onboarding, retention, and expansion. So this bow tie, if you will, is what maps the real revenue engine of the company and of your product, right? So this is the full revenue architecture of the business, and that's how, in some shape or form, the ELT and the board view it. So notice we're not no nowhere here is product and features and backlogs and any of that kind of stuff, right? Most product teams will stop at launch. You build, ship, and hand off. Or said differently, they'll focus exclusively on the right-hand side. Product teams will talk about onboarding and churn and retention and that sort of thing. But the reality is that as product management, we actually own both sides. It doesn't mean that we have to have direct control of the P&L, right? Most product teams are not in that situation. But it does mean we enable and influence both sides. Because product isn't just about building a solution, it's about owning that bridge between a sales promise and a realized margin. That's really where we're playing. So the product leaders who can demonstrate a command of and ownership of both of these sides, they earn a seat at the table.
In fact, when we've shared this with other cohorts, full private cohorts, this was something that almost all of them said was a, a, a different way for them to bring the conversation to a different level inside their organization. Not at a feature level, not at the backlog level, but to, I'm going to use my term, to impose a conversation and impose a visual planning discipline that makes and helps CRO, COO, CEO understand what role product is playing in the revenue cycle. So it's something that we've gotten some really amazing feedback on in terms of its potential.
In fact, one of the reasons why we see sales, there's that constant complaint, the friction with sales. They're off selling whatever features, whatever they want all the time. And oftentimes that happens because the the product team, product leadership is not involved with sales. And I don't mean in terms of closing deals, although that's
That's
helpful,
not it.
right?
No.
But in terms of really clearly helping to lay out the sales strategy. I mean, it's all like we had several CPOs talk to us about how one of the things they do and they're trying to get their lieutenants to do is sit down with like the CRO and the CRO's lieutenants in crafting the sales strategy for the next year, for the next quarter, in a way that lines up with the product strategy, right? And I'm not trying to oversimplify this or say it's super easy, right? But that is better than simply not being involved at all.
I am going to oversimplify it at the risk of just doing it. If you were to take this into a sales leadership meeting, not a sales rep meeting, and talk about your roadmap in terms of its context to this business model, when they see this, they will get it and tell them where you're positioning initiatives, not features, but major initiatives. You would be amazed at the kind of reaction and the kind of feedback you'll start to begin to get. The other piece is you can now confirm that you're working on things that matter to the side of the business that's responsible for revenue. So that's how you become a player at the table in a very concrete way.
So I'll skip through some of these kind of quick because I know we're about 15 minutes left and people have questions. So the thing we need to do, and this is one of the things that we teach in our course, in our business fluency course, you see the name there at the bottom of the slide, is we are dealing with that world of features, right? We've got 40 features, 100 features, whatever it is, right? And we need to shift to instead of bringing 40 features to a reset conversation, which is going to guarantee a debate about priorities, we need to bring, let's say, 10 fundable bets, right? You need to create a portfolio review. And a fundable bet is essentially it has an economic outcome, it has a cost that includes not just what the team is working on, not just the development effort, but everything, but the go-to-market effort and everything else the company would not be doing as a result of doing this thing. So it's the opportunity cost and the trade-off there. It has a risk profile and a confidence level based on that evidence. And this is what we mean by expressing it as a bet. If you can't express it as a bet, it's going to be vulnerable.
In our cohort, we walk through a number of exercises to basically lead you to this. So to kind of make this a little bit more concrete for you in terms of taking the things that constitute what you might see today as your backlog, how to raise the level of them to get to something we would call funding units or candidates for investment, and then converting those into investable bets. So there's a clear, rational approach to prepare you as a leader, as a senior member of the product team, to have the conversation with your ELT and or others appropriate about what product is doing and why, and what the impact is, economic impact is in a business. Having done that, what's really becomes important, and I alluded to this earlier, is how do you basically, I use the term, how do you declare something is good to go or not? And so we talk about a lean governance approach of locking these initiatives down. The purpose of that is so we don't relitigate the roadmap every quarter. As Shardul and I have gone around for the last 9 months and talked to a lot of product leaders and specific CPOs. One particular instance that comes to mind is someone mentioned that because they were not working with an ELT that was aware of what product was doing and the translation tax was heavy, there was an iteration every quarter of the roadmap. So we'd work on something for 90 days and then come back and reprioritize at the end of 90 days. And so this mechanism, this lock, adjust, kill, or LAC, if you want to use an acronym, is a way of basically setting up the stage at the planning cycle, predefining what a good bet looks like, and then using that to protect it unless some conditions specific to that initiative start to change, or at least have the conversation at that level. The same thing with the adjust. Time flex, change resources, mix things up. And then the last one, and somebody alluded to this earlier, and I thought that was funny that they said, I'm surprised when I'm the first person in the company to suggest killing a product. And here's a way to basically have something that looks like it's not working out with right conditions that are evidence show up not to continue to do work on it. Because to me, the worst conversation we can have is a sunk cost conversation. We keep working on something knowing that it's not going to go anywhere because we're almost finished with it. So we're talking about freeing up resources and most importantly, defining what I call displacement, what we call displacement, which is when we make this move and we make this shift, there's going to be some impact the entire organization will feel. So bottom line is, if you're doing this and that CFO email arrives, it's back to Van's question. I believe that's who asked this early on. If LAC is already in place, didn't say it's an easy exercise, but it's definitely one that you can manage and you can certainly navigate through and maintain your integrity, your credibility, and your sanity and your emotional stability and your mental health as you go through it. If this email arrives and you're not doing this, it's a free-for-all. And we already described the pain and the failure mode on this. So we're back to what we started with. These principles we lay out, these pillars of this operating system are what give you the ability to implement this. And we provide a mechanism to give you that understanding of how to do it. The technique of this, and I don't want to jump slides ahead, but the technique of this is to basically show you how to do it, not tell you how to do it. This is the telling part. This is the selling part of this. The actual cohort is work, hands-on, lots of repetitive inside game sort of exercises that drive this forward. I already talked about this. I'll just reiterate it. A lot of playbooks, a lot of mental models, a lot of hands-on. The rule of thumb is we teach a principle and then you practice it. We teach a principle and then you work on it. We teach a principle and you work on it. Real business case. We have a business case theme that runs through this that allows you to take actual scenarios, data. These are things that it's not made up. This is an amalgamation of 2 or 3 actual client situations or employment situations that Shardul and I have lived with in the past. So we're grounding you in something that we know is real. And then the actual working session. And obviously, because it's cohort learning, you guys get to basically learn from each other and share. We don't come in with all the answers. And what you learn in this process is we're not teaching you for right answers. We're teaching you for practice. We're teaching you for discipline. We're teaching you for the process of how to do this better. And then we give you some very hard things to run with and take off and start doing the next day.
Yeah. And so 5 skills, The goal is to leave you with skills that are immediately applicable. Everything from getting executives aligned, how to be able to frame product decisions in business terms that resonate with them, doing that features into investable bets that Mike and I talked about earlier. So building those effective business cases, connecting the work to economic outcomes, so mapping it to the revenue engine and to the company's scoreboard. And we have a whole session on that as well. What is the company scoreboard? Improving the trade-off decisions, right? It's not that, most of the times when we're debating trade-offs, we're really, when you boil it down, we're talking about allocating among projects. But what we really want to be able to do is trade off commitments to business outcomes. There's different business outcomes. Which one do you guys want? That's the real question. So we talk through how to present that, and then ultimately leading product as a business. That's certainly Mike and I have got to put a flag down. We believe that's the future of product management is to become actually to kind of go back to what it was, at least when he and I started. When we started, product management was a business management role, and that's where we think it's going to be going back to. So you'll leave with the language, the frameworks, the confidence. Here's a couple of testimonials. We've been running this as a bunch of private cohorts, select groups of people, invitation only. We've gotten some pretty good feedback. You can read them here. And now for the first time, we're opening it up for the public. It's on Maven. It's if you lead a product team, this one, frankly, we think these principles are applicable for any kind of business or product, but particularly if you're in B2B SaaS, and if you're beyond that startup stage, you're kind of scaling up growth, you're at growth stage, or maybe you're PE backed or VC backed, and you're in a role or you're getting into a role where you're being held more and more accountable for outcomes, and you need the ability to influence not just cross-functionally your peers, but at the next level, right? This is perfect for you. So we've got a July cohort coming up. I'll put the link here. I'll put the link in the chat. So there it is. It's $15.95, although we have an early bird. So if you sign up by June 29th, then just put in promo code early bird and it's $400 off. It's 2 days, 4 modules, 5 working sessions, pretty impactful. So that's what it is. We will send you out, of course, this recording and the deck. So you'll have it, as well as this other details. But other than that, let's go to questions.
Question.
Yeah. So let's see. Let me go back because I saw a lot of questions in the chat. First of all, let me go back to Van first because he's been the most patient. Van, as a product manager, we're often expected to be proactive and make recommendations before we have perfect information. How do you balance acting with uncertainty while still building credibility and trust with leadership? In your experience as being proactive, something product managers are generally expected to figure out over time, or should organizations intentionally coach and develop these skills? What have you seen work best? So, you want to go first, Mike, or do you want me to go first?
No, I kind of picked up the first part of Van's question a little while
Yeah,
ago in terms
that's
about
great.
declaration of truth. No such thing as perfect information, right? The only thing you can do is prepare. And I alluded to the fact that I've said, I'm guilty of this. I have a scar where I would not sit with my team and do this worst case scenario, and then the worst case actually happens, and it puts you on your heels. And my advice from experience is don't think like that. If you're a leader, if you've got a team of 4 people, 5 people, 50 people, do the practice bit about what would we do if and play it out. And the more you do that, and it kind of alludes to Beth's question or comment, the confidence of the team goes up, the conviction of the team goes up. Hey, we're working on the right stuff. And if we had to, under pressure, do X, here's what would go. And that means that the leader shows up in the room and he has a very specific, crisp, hard answer with the reasons underneath it. You guys look like you know what you're doing. The ELT and the other people in the organization, hey, those guys got it. So the second part of the question is, should organizations intentionally coach and develop those skills? The answer is obviously yes. I've done a lot of workshops over the years, private cohorts, bespoke training sessions, and I get with a room of product leaders and or product senior product people, and I ask, how many of you had formal training? And if there are 50 people in the old days in a room or 20 people on a Zoom call, rarely do more than 20% of the population raise their hand. That's a gap that's too huge for the expectations they have. So how do you do that? You got to be noisy. You got to talk to your leadership. I know training is an easy, expendable thing that gets cut in uncertain times, but somehow you have to figure out how to do that.
So, should they? Yes. Do they? You know, I think ultimately organizations invest in training as a retention tactic, is really what it comes down to. I know that once you get to the senior executive level, there's there's no training. No one's going to coach you. You're kind of
That
expected
is true.
to be able to do it. As you kind of go down the chain, frankly, even at the director, when I was a director, like I would have loved to have some mentorship and coaching, but the thing is that product leaders also and product executives are super busy, right? It's really, really hard to find the time. That's not an excuse, but it's what happens. So companies should invest in training. And then if you are at the individual contributor level, let's say, ideally your product leader that you're reporting to is providing some form of mentorship or training. But, unfortunately, the reality is it doesn't always happen. I'm sure a lot of you have experienced that yourselves. So, ultimately at the end of the day, I kind of came to the conclusion a long time ago that, you have to be master of your own destiny. No one's going to manage your career better than you. So, should organizations? Yeah, they should. And like Mike mentioned, I have, we both have gone into organizations and provided like workshops and things like that for training. We have a version of this same Maven course that we do on a bespoke basis that we come into organizations and it's more customized and things like that. So let me go into some more questions. Ranjan asks, there are so many assumptions we have to make. How can we talk about it with confidence? So I put this note in there in the chat. So I'll talk about it briefly here. We do have in fact, there's a whole lesson in our course on exactly that assumption mapping, we call it. Like, how do you capture all the assumptions, map them actually back to the scoreboard, and surface them in a way to the executive team so that we can get to some coherent decision making, right? And along with that goes the confidence level. Are we 10% confident or are we 80% confident? And what's driving that? And the interesting thing is that most executive teams, at least Mike and I have worked with, like, they want that. They do want that. So again, a lot of this is in terms of the framing of it, right? It's not just this sort of assumption vomit, right? With all the different caveats.
But
It's in how you frame it in a way that helps them understand that, look, we have this outcome or this outcome. That's the trade-off. Underlying it, we're making certain assumptions because we have imperfect information. Here's our confidence level as a result in our proposal. And if we're at, let's say, 25%, then the natural question is, okay, well, how do we get to 100%? Well, here are the next set of steps that we would recommend to try and get closer to that 100%. But if you're asking us to make a decision now, it's weighted on these assumptions with this confidence level today.
and adding to that, and if the assumptions prove to be inaccurate, here's what we would do next. Here's how we will respond to any assumption that breaks. That's the complete cycle of managing trade, making the investment recommendations, talking about the trade-offs, understanding displacement, and then telling and explaining to the executives, this is what will happen if something changes.
Alex, general thoughts on the EPIC initiative, strategic theme, company goal, object structure. The business translation layer L3, L4 falls at the initiative level. Those are the fundable bets, correct?
That's right.
So I apologize. I'm not sure I fully followed your question, but it sounds like maybe Mike, you did.
Maybe Alex, if we're talking around and not answering, maybe you want to come off mute and just tell us what you're thinking if you're still here.
No, I'm here. Thanks, Mike. I think you answered my question. Like, where's that translatable level layer for the CFO and the ELT? If you're setting up the subject structure, you're linking epics to initiatives, to strategic themes, to company goals, everything is hooked up. Where do you add that translation layer to which object in the thread? I believe it's
I
the
thought
initiative
that's
level.
I thought that's
Exactly.
where you were going. I didn't
Yeah.
want to assume anything. And if I were operating with you in the way we've done this in the past, I would link this at the initiative level, probably not the epic level because they're generally
No,
too
no.
vague, right? That breaks down pretty quickly if you do that. But the
Yeah.
initiative is what's on the roadmap. The initiative is the naming convention and labels we use to describe this across the organization so people understand it at that level and it applies
Yeah.
universally. Everybody
My
from sales to
yeah.
finance will get that, right?
Yeah, my question was more of initiative versus strategic theme, and I
Ah,
think initiative is the right level.
I'm biased toward initiative because it's
I agree.
concrete and it's not a thematic approach because that's broad. It's saying we're going to do X, Y, and Z for this specific market, and here's the economic benefit downstream or immediately, however it lines up. And we can make that into an investable bet. And we can change that bet by saying we thought we were going to deliver these six things. We're now going to deliver three, or we thought we are going to deliver that by 6 months. It's now going to be nine. Themes don't work like that for us, right?
Got it. Yep. We're on the same page. Thanks, Mike.
Sure.
The one thing
I
I'll
still owe
add,
you a beer and a deep dish pizza.
Sure.
the one thing I'll add is that especially when you get to kind of more complex portfolios, at least in terms of my experience working with CFOs, so if you have multiple product lines, they may be looking at it starting at the top in terms of the product lines. So like, if any of you have seen the classic BCG matrix, right? And there's pros and cons of it, but just for the sake of answering it, a lot of CFOs do think of, okay, this is our cash cow. We just got to keep the revenue engine flowing. This one is our growth area, that so on and so forth. So it could be that, or it could be segments. I've worked in companies where they were servicing, it was a platform play, but they were servicing different segments. So a lot of the times the CFO was thinking in terms of how much do we invest in this market or customer segment or business unit versus that one. So it starts there and kind of trickles down from that. So then, in fact, I naively, early in my career, tried to map that to our classic initiative epic story. And it, of course, and I very proudly went to that with my CFO and it failed. Because I spent the whole time trying to explain to them terminology, which they ultimately didn't really care about. So I just add
You
that
know,
perspective there.
I'm going to borrow a phrase from you, Shardul, and I'm going to attribute it to you because it's a little dicey or it's a little provocative. The higher up you go in the organization, the dumber you get, right? I mean, that's being tongue in cheek. And anybody here who's a vice president, I don't mean it that way. I've served as an EVP, and you get to a place where there are too many things going on for you to get detail on anything. So the people that work around us and support us have to present us choices, detailed enough, but explicit enough so we can go A, not B, or D, not F. And that's just the way the job function works at that level.
I think we've gotten to all the questions. I know they've got to move on. So I think let's just end it here. Thanks everyone so much. Like I said, we'll send out the recording and we will send out the slides. Take a look at the course. It's in July. Sign up. And if you need to reach either one of us, there's our contact info as well. At the bottom, me and Mike, we're on LinkedIn. You can email us. I'm happy to help, happy to chat anyway. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your week. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you much. Appreciate you all coming. Appreciate it. Thank you. Bye bye.
Thanks.